Hey, what is up mortals? It is AC here, and before we get into today's video, there is something I'd like to say. I'd like to let you all know that we have a merch store. Some of the items in it are only available for a limited amount of time, so if you're interested, go into the description and check it out. Each purchase helps us make more content. Secondly, if this video hits 300 likes by the end of the week, we will continue this what if. Thirdly, if you didn't know, only 41.3% of you guys are subscribed to us, so please hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon. Now with that out of the way, let's get into the story. One for All. That was the name of the power he'd inherit, the name of the ability that All Might seemed to deem him worthy of receiving. The mere thought made Izuku a bit lightheaded, excitement and shock swirling inside his chest until they mixed into something he couldn't really recognize. The green-haired boy sighed restlessly, rubbing at his eyes with his left hand for a while before he resumed his staring at the ceiling from his bed, locks of verdant hair messy. A few inches away from his hand, his cell phone screen was lit with the message, delete contacts, and the options, yes or no. He knew what he had to do, of course, but it was a difficult step to take nonetheless, maybe because it'd make that change into this new period of his life official, and Deku felt as if he had way too much to think about already. With another sigh, he got up and sat on his bed, diverting his gaze to the All Might Beam's digital clock on his bedside table. The smiling face of his idol stared back unwaveringly, alongside the numbers in bright red, 5:04 a.m. Tomorrow, he would meet All Might on Dagobah Beach, and it is a bit funny that he'd picked that specific location to talk about whatever it was they'd need to do to transfer All Might's quirk to him. And then, he didn't know. Izuku was used to being uncertain about the future. No one could tell what it'd bring after all. But at least, now, he felt confident in saying that it was a bright one he'd meet, and he'd be sure to meet it head-on. With that thought in mind, his lips curled into a small, determined smile, and he reached out with his hand to grab a cell phone. Gazing at the contact's name for the last time, Izuku pressed the yes button and took the first step into a brighter tomorrow. Sir, thank you. He would become a hero, just like All Might. What? Hauling trash? Deku's voice screeched in surprise, looking around what had practically become a junkyard over the years. He'd grown familiar with the place during the last 2 years, yes. The dent he'd made into a truck when he first used one of Sir's marbles was still there for everyone to see after all, but he'd never thought he'd go from training here to cleaning here. All Might seemed to find it all extremely amusing, or maybe not. The man seemed to laugh by instinct, sometimes, and it was hard to know which smiles were genuine and which smiles were put into his face to complete his image, that of the smiling symbol of peace. Yes, young Midoriya! In order to train your body properly, we will be restoring the speech to its former beauty. Training my body? I thought I was in good enough shape, Midoriya muttered to himself, images of all the training he did under Sir flashing through his mind in quick succession. He thought he was doing pretty well in the physical department, since Sir put a lot of focus on that aspect. That elicited another chuckle from the symbol of peace, who laid a strong hand on Izuku's shoulder. And you are! Clearly you've taken good care of yourself so far, young Midoriya. However, my quirk, One for All, is the full physical power of many people put into one. Certainly you've seen my power in use before, haven't you, young Midoriya? Yes, All Might. Of course I have. I used to watch videos of your fights all day. I still do sometimes. Why? Well, think, my boy. You've seen the force of the power I wield, haven't you? What do you think would happen to an unprepared arm right now if we put all the pressure on it? Izuku paused for a second as the symbol of peace's words reached his ears. What would happen if... Oh. Ouch. Izuku cringed at the mental picture, looking up at the imposing figure that was All Might with a pair of fearful emerald eyes. You mean... The results wouldn't be pretty, as you can imagine, but that's why I came up with this! The man held up a stack of papers, neatly organized, with his left hand, attracting Izuku's attention to it almost immediately. Looking closely, it seemed to be... some sort of fitness plan? It detailed the diet he'd have to leave, when he'd have to wake up, and a whole ton of other things. My American Dream Plan! With this, you'll be receiving a power in no time at all, young Midoriya. And since you've already trained by yourself beforehand, we'll have a lot of time to spare to train you using One for All. This will test your will and prepare your vessel. but only if you manage to follow it. So, what do you say, my boy? Up for the challenge? This was more than he could have ever hoped for. Growing up, Deku had been accustomed to receiving nothing but disdain, if even that. More often than not, he'd be the ghost, unnoticed, avoided. Teachers wouldn't call on him, and people would do their best to avoid being around him. His only friend was Kachan, and, well, friend might be an overstatement. Meeting Sir had changed everything. He'd grown stronger, yes, but it was more than that. He felt more confident now. Maybe he was still awkward, yes, and maybe he still couldn't help but flinch when Kachan smirked at him. But for the first time in forever, he felt as if he was capable of seizing his dream. And now, that wasn't true anymore. Now he had people who believed in him, who trusted him. Out of everyone else, All Might had chosen him to be his heir. Sir had seen his wish to be a hero, not Kachan's, not anyone else's, his. And Izuku wouldn't let any of them down. So, he swallowed his reservations, clenched his fists to keep his fears at bay, and met the challenge head-on.
Yes, I've got this!
During the next 6 months, Izuku learned something very, very important. The importance of resilience. Because while his training with Sir had been unforgiving, training with All Might was hell on earth. The weighted projectiles he'd been carrying and all of the training he'd done helped, especially since, as we know, Sir Nighteye trained Deku specifically to be able to handle One For All. But One For All required every muscle in his body to be ready, no matter how unconventional. Thus, the cleaning on the beach continued as usual, even if it only took 6 months instead of 10. Already having some experience with physical conditioning, Midoriya was able to curb his own wishes and keep himself from overdoing it. He stuck to the diet he'd been given religiously, dragging fridges and microwaves out with the same enthusiasm you'd seen someone doing their favorite activity, though perhaps with a lot more pain involved. After 6 months, however, it was done, and as Izuku dragged a car through the sand with his bare hands, the sun setting behind him and illuminating the world in orange hues, All Might couldn't be proud of the boy. Finally, Izuku settled atop the huge pile of garbage he'd dragged away, climbing with some degree of difficulty, and rose a single fist to the sky, a silent scream of triumph, a testament to the boy's will. The symbol of peace smiled to himself for a moment before making his presence known to the boy by clapping as he approached. The green-haired boy, alerted by the noise, turned too abruptly and, inevitably, tripped over his own feet in his exhaustion. Deku's eyes widened as he slowly fell towards the sand, before, with a gust of wind in his wake, he was caught by All Might, who then set the boy on the ground. The youth stumbled to his feet, clearly exhausted, and looked up to stare at All Might in the eyes. The pro hero was surprised by the boy's intent. He looked almost desperate in his determination. And Toshinori, who felt like he was staring at an old mirror, couldn't help but smile at the sight. "You have done well, young Midoriya. This was to be a trial of your will more than anything, and you have gone above and beyond my expectations." Midoriya swallowed a gasp of air. His muscles seemed to scream from the continuous effort, as if each and every inch of his body was now sorry. He wanted nothing more than to go to sleep, but he wouldn't. This was the moment. "And I am proud to reward your efforts, young Midoriya. You're worthy to inherit my power. Now."
Oh my god, this is it. I did it. I wonder how it works. A quirk that's transferable has never been heard of before. Maybe it's by touch? Oh, but wouldn't that be risky for All Might? What if he passed it to an enemy by accident? No, maybe it's something else like...
All Might plucked a solitary strand of hair from his head. "Eat this." Izuku would have nightmares about that night for years to come. They agreed to meet again on the day after, a Saturday, just after the sun rose from beyond the horizon. As he approached the beach, Izuku interrupted his jogging and took a moment or two to appreciate the way it now looked. Just beyond the line of the horizon, far in the sea, the sun's light bathed the clouds in a plethora of orange and rosy tones. It was a picturesque sight, in Izuku's opinion, and certainly a far cry from what it had been before. He'd admit, he had his doubts about All Might's training and test of will, but this made it also worth it. So enthralled he was by the sight, Izuku completely missed the sound of All Might's approaching steps behind him. Thus, when the tall, skinny man placed a hand on his shoulder from behind to alert Izuku of his presence, the boy all but jumped, stumbling to turn and look at All Might.
All Might, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. Was I late? I knew I should have hurried to meet you, but I saw the sunrise and...
All Might chuckled softly at that, shaking his head and raising his hand to stop the boy from sluttering more apologies. Everything is fine, young Midoriya. You got here before I did, and it is a beautiful sight. Take it in, boy, and be proud. You did this. Izuku nodded at that, smiling a bit, but remained silent. The two walked together to the beach slowly, comfortable in the routine of it all. As they settled a few feet away from the shoreline, Toshinori looked at Izuku. Say, my boy, have you tried using One for All yet? Deku shook his head at that.
No. I was going to, but then I remembered what he said would happen to anyone unprepared and, decided to wait.
Toshinori grinned at the boy encouragingly, still in his skeletal form, then inhaled and beckoned the sparks of One for All still within him. In a second, the man was replaced by the huge muscular wall that was the Pro Hero All Might. That's all fine, my boy. Your safety first, after all. Why don't you try it now, young Midoriya?
Alright.
A minute passed. Then, Izuku turned to All Might with an uncertain look on his face.
How do I do that again? I've never, had a quirk. So, I have no idea how to do that. Oh my god, I'm letting All Might down. I won't be able to do it, and then he'll tell me I'm not fit to be a successor, and then—
Well, first, calm yourself, my boy. Everything will be fine. Calm down and focus. Can you do that for me? Izuku nodded wordlessly, closing his eyes and letting the panic dissipate into his chest. He inhaled deeply, then, remembering the meditation method he'd been taught by Sir, imagined the oxygen flowing through all of his body, dividing to fill each vein of his limb. Concentrating on that calmed him, made him dissociate from the nervousness. All he had to do was picture the oxygen flowing through his veins, through his body, through each and every cell. And then, Deku felt it. A spark, a flame, a candle of power in his chest. Suddenly, all he could feel was power, flowing through his veins like liquid adrenaline, the crackle of electricity faintly accompanying it. He vaguely heard the sound of All Might gasping in surprise, but couldn't focus on it. His eyes snapped open and Izuku looked at himself. Red, shining lines seemed to fill all of his body, each arm and leg showing them. A few lines of what looked like green electricity appeared and dissipated quickly. Despite himself, Izuku could feel his lips parting into a large, happy grin, and the boy turned his eyes to his idol, who looked just as happy as he himself felt. He completely let go of the mental picture of the oxygen flowing through his body in small parts and focused on this new feeling, the feeling of power within his body.
I did it, All Might! I did it!
The symbol of peace flashed him a thumbs up. Yes, you did, young Midoriya. How do you feel, my boy? His grin grew even wider, and he moved to step towards All Might.
I feel—
As soon as he took the first step, an enormous gust of air blasted through the sand, and the next thing Izuku knew, he was in the air at least 30 meters up, if not more, red lines still running through his body. He marveled at the sight of the sunrise from this high up, mind suddenly empty of everything else, and then agony like he never felt before rushed through his leg. He looked down to see the limb now looked purple, bruised and broken, with a few lines of blood decorating the already grievous injury. See, had he continued to focus on the meditation technique, he'd have divided One for All through his body at a low percentage. Since he lost his focus, he managed to keep One for All at his entire body, but at 100%, which means every step has the power of a smash. Needless to say, Izuku fainted before even reaching the ground. Before we get back into the story, I would like to say that we've got a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive goes over the hard facts of the anime presented. Now, in case you guys didn't know, we have a third channel called Anime Theory. Anime Theory mainly focuses on a large variety of mind-boggling anime theories. If you're interested in content like this, please go check the description below, or click the icon in the top right corner. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back into the story. Deku would wake up a few hours later, laying on a white, hospital-like bed, though he didn't seem to actually be in one. Looking to his side, he noticed a short, elderly woman who seemed to be scolding All Might. They both caught sight of him soon after, and he heard her saying,
This isn't over, Toshinori.
The woman walked up to him, showing him a kind smile.
So, how are you feeling? Any nausea or leftover pain?
The question brought Izuku out of his stupor, and he shook his head.
Not at all. You're a recovery girl, the youthful heroine, aren't you? Did you heal me?
Recovery girl nodded at this, seemingly pleased by the recognition.
I did. You seemed to have passed out from the sudden pain in your leg, but you had plenty of stamina to heal you with. I've half a mind to scold you for being so careless, but since it was your first time using One for All, I'll let it slide. What? You know about?
All Might approached them slowly, glancing at them both warily before shaking his head and smiling at Izuku. No need to fear, young Midoriya. Chiyo is a very old friend of mine, and she's aware of the intricacies of One for All. There was a moment of silence.
Well, at least my limbs didn't explode,
Izuku muttered to himself. All Might chuckled at that, placing a hand on top of the boy's head and ruffling his green locks affectionately. Indeed, young Midoriya. The next step is to learn how to regulate how much power you use at a time. Can you describe how it felt to call upon One for All?
Yeah, I was focusing. It's a meditation technique I learned from the internet. You breathe in slowly, then imagine the oxygen being divided so that it flows through your body at a low percentage.
All Might was silent for a second. And yet, I am sure that was 100% you used then.
I think I lost focus on the low percentage part. It was a very new experience. Well then,
Recovery Girl interjected.
You'll have to practice control. I'd rather be there to supervise you if that's okay.
Now, Chio, there's no need to.
Of course you can watch us. And can I have an autograph?
Izuku had already passed his test of will, but it seemed as if All Might was about to begin. During the next 4 months, Izuku slowly got accustomed to One for All, being supervised by All Might and Recovery Girl to make sure no further accidents happened, or more realistically, to deal with them when they did. He took around a month to get the hang of using One for All at a low percentage, even with the help of the meditation technique he'd been taught, and broke his limbs way more often than Recovery Girl would have liked. This was, as we know it in canon, full cow. When he could, usually at night, he practiced with everything Sir taught him, particularly the weighted marbles. Sir had warned him to not let All Might know about him, so Izuku tried to avoid using them in front of his mentor, no matter how bad he felt about it. Plus, their time together was usually occupied by One for All, which he had grasped decently. The real challenge, however, was not using One for All in his entire body. Since his way of accessing the quirk had to do with the meditation technique he'd been taught, he lacked the instinctual turning off the quirk to walk, which meant every step he took was a jump. That was dangerous, but not impossible to get used to. He hadn't quite mastered it when the Yui Entrance Exams came up, but it was enough in Izuku's opinion. All Might seemed to think so too. So in the few hours he had before he was due to the exam, he met All Might on Dagobah Beach. Neither of them said anything. All Might simply shot him a proud, wide smile, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder, and the boy had to fight to stop himself from crying. He didn't succeed, but that's fine. He hurried to Yui with tears in his eyes and a smile on his lips. The boy got there a bit earlier than in canon, slowing his steps to look at Yui with wonder clear in his eyes. For the few extra minutes he had, Izuku observed the ever-growing crowd quite intensely, mumbling endlessly about their quirks. It made many of them uncomfortable, especially Tenya, who didn't get the chance to reprimand him as Izuku immediately shut up when the written exam was about to happen, and after Present Mike started talking to the crowd. As usual, panic welled and burst within Izuku's chest, constricting his chest tightly, but he managed to keep himself calm, breathing in deeply a few times and imagining the oxygen traveling his body. He only partially listened to Present Mike's speech, still somewhat focused on calming his nerves. As soon as Present Mike loudly announced the exam is to start, however, he shot into action, tightening his muscles as he imagined the power of One for All being spread throughout his body. The familiar crackle of energy marked his success, and he leapt into the battlefield with a single empowered step. At this point in the timeline, Izuku can only handle about 5% of One for All's power comfortably, but he can, if necessary, push it up to 10% by risking pain and injury. The other students didn't take long to follow his cues, but his fast reaction earned him a precious few moments to scout the area, emerald eyes darting from side to side and taking note of the position of any robots he could find. There had to be an optimal way of going about this. His training with Sir had nailed that into his head, if nothing else, the value of keeping cool. So no matter how frightened he felt, he decided right there and then that he'd do his absolute best. This was his chance, more than anything else. His chance to prove his worth, not to All Might, but to himself. After everything he had been through, all of the grueling, tiresome tasks he'd done in the name of training, all of the bullying he survived to keep the flame that was his dream alive, this was his chance to seize it. So Izuku decided, right there and then, with his own 2 hands, he would take hold of the bright future that All Might saw. With his own 2 lungs, he would breathe in the scent of victory, and with his own heart, he would take his fear, his panic, his despair, and use them as fuel. Izuku wasn't aiming to pass, he was aiming to win. For All Might, for Sir, and for himself. The sound of the first 1-pointer being crushed under the force of his fist, pieces of scrap metal flying through the air as the robot was disassembled because of the impact, was the horn of war that would release him. He quickly used the momentum to follow forward and leap into another robot, aiming for the most vulnerable part he could see with an elbow strike. and feeling intensely satisfied as that too crumbled with a hit. This was a culmination of all his hard work, the results of all the sorrow he'd endured. The rest of the exam flew by him, but Izuku felt as if he was doing well. He decided not to count his points, thinking that it'd be more effective to simply focus on wrecking every robot he could see and worry about points later. Thus, the flash of green that was Midoriya bounced through the exam grounds like a storm, leaving behind nothing but wide gazes and metal wreckages.
Only a few minutes left!
That was around when he saw it. A large shadow loomed over the fake city, an unspoken promise of destruction even before one laid eyes upon the thing itself. Izuku stopped running to look up slowly, a bewildered expression settling in his face, accompanied by a surge of unease in his gut. The looming silhouette of the zero-pointer met his eyes.
We're supposed to take that down?
He muttered to himself, emerald eyes wide. Then he remembered. No, they weren't. It was a distraction. This was a perfect opportunity to get some more robot kills while everyone was distracted, but a scream reached his ears. He couldn't make out exactly what, but it sounded like someone was asking for help. The decision was made for him, and just like before with the sludge villain, Izuku's body was moving before he could properly process what was happening. The silhouette of the robot became larger and larger as he approached it. The fake buildings reduced to shadows in the corner of his eyes as he traversed the city with One For All to aid him. Finally, he reached an area that was mostly wrecked already. He felt the now familiar warmth of One For All disperse inside him as his feet touched the ground, and he looked around frantically, his heart thumping in his chest. Someone had screamed, he was sure of it, but
there!
A girl about his age, and probably a tad shorter than he was, seemed to be immobilized beneath some of the local wreckage. Logically, he knew that the robot wouldn't actually kill her. It was Yui after all. But then their eyes met, and she looked terrified. He beckoned One For All forward, and like a sleeping beast, the flame answered his call, bursting to life within his chest and spreading throughout his body, empowered by the urgency he felt. He used a single foot to jump, and a second after the red sneaker touched the ground, Izuku was in the sky, flying towards the zero-pointer. At 5%, One For All was already an absurd amount of power. At 10%, even more so. Even at such low percentages, the power was second only to All Might himself, laying leaps and bounds above what any other super strength quirk he'd seen before was capable of. It should be more than enough to wreck the zero-pointer, but what if it wasn't? Could he risk it? The answer was easy. A particular memory rose to his mind. He'd been sitting beside All Might on the beach, watching the sunset after a harsh day of training.
Hey, All Might? What does it feel for you? When you use One For All, I mean.
All Might had looked thoughtful for a while. For me? It always came somewhat naturally for me, my boy. But if I had to put it into words...
Clench the muscles in your butt cheeks and scream from the very depth of your heart!
Izuku yelled out loud, drawing his arm back as green electricity burst around his body, eyes flaring like two green flashlights. The zero-pointer's head was getting closer and closer. He beckoned the power forward. More and more. Izuku willed One For All to give him its best, and by the pain that now coursed through his veins, he succeeded. Unbeknownst to him, his hair seemed to light up with that smash! His fist came into contact with the hard metal shell of the robot, and then its head disappeared, and the harsh winds generated by the blow pushed the rest of its back as if it had been impacted everywhere at once. Explosions burst from within it, as a result of the internal damage to its circuits. He didn't get to focus on that, however. He had the strange feeling he'd just broken every bone in his body.
I hope she's okay,
he muttered. And then Izuku knew no more. Thank you all for watching the video to the end. Now there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. On behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank the writer of this video and the editors of this video. Their details will be in the description. If you're a voice actor, editor, or writer, go into the Discord that is in the description of this video and hit up the head of one of those areas. We're always looking for new members to join us. That's it from us for today's video. So thank you all for watching. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're interested, and hit that like button if you liked the video. Until next time, peace out mortals, have an amazing day.